Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tubeless Creek Instagram live conversation. I am your host proprietor, Jason Haas. My guest today is the first repeat guest that I have ever had outside of some of the folks here from the winery. So that guest is Elaine Chukan Brown, who is a writer, author, illustrator, speaker, host, and generally just a wine phenom who I'm excited to get to have back to talk about their new book. But while we do, as I always do, while people join, I want to show a few pictures about what's going on here at the winery. So first, just to give you a sense, it is almost impossibly green out here. We've had good rain in fairly substantial doses, and then we've had long stretches of sun in between that rain. So we're in the end of a 4-week-long stretch of sun. It's supposed to start raining again next week. But it's gorgeous out there. We are taking advantage of the time to prune. So you can see we're in the middle of that work right now. I got a picture in between two rows, a pruned row. You can't really see it very well. Let me see if I can get a different picture that shows that a little bit better. And you can see on the left, this is a pruned row of Picardon, and on the right is an unpruned row. A little hard to see in there. What else are we doing? We are having a lot of fun with the sheep out in the vineyard. So we are getting our flock of sheep through most of the blocks for the second time now. A little hard to see. You can see how high the cover crop is in that photo. Let me see if I can get one with the sheep in it. A little hard. They were kind of far away at the top of the hill. You can sort of see them in the backdrop there. So that's exciting that we now are on a second pass through the entire vineyard. And all of that has regrown since the first visit, the first time they went through the property. Also, a little update of our new livestock guardian dogs. So we got a couple of puppies last harvest. They are now like 140, 150 pounds and have assumed their role guarding the flock. So they're doing great. They'll turn 1 in June. So it's amazing that they are as big as they are, as young as they are. Okay, I think that's it. One more picture, just because I think it's kind of fun. I got a picture of Sadie, my dog, when we were out walking around. You can see just how deep that cover crop is. You almost lose the dogs. Okay, I am going to now stop sharing, and then I will invite Elaine to join. And then I can't wait for you to meet them. Okay, I'm going to send the invitation through. We did our test a couple days ago. Magic!
Hello.
Technology is so great when it works.
I've gotten to see you so much in the last 2-3 weeks. It's fantastic.
What a treat.
Yes. Thank
Not
you.
to see me. Treat to see you. Treat for
No,
me to see.
no. I'm always happy when we get to connect. So thank you.
Me too. Okay, so I don't know if you were on when I did the very quick introduction to some of the many things that you have done, from writing to illustrating to hosting to speaking to contributing to books to having published a new book of your own last summer. But I would love to start by getting you to talk a little bit about your unique path into wine, because as much as I would hope that everyone who is watching today also watched our conversation 5 years ago, I think that's
Right.
maybe a little optimistic to assume that they've remembered it well.
Yeah. Well, it's a super meandering story. So the bullet point version is I grew up in Alaska, commercial fishing for salmon. Started doing that when I was 9. wine was not really a thing in Alaska at that time. There were like two, maybe three, like French, because again, time period, every fine dining was French
Right.
inspired, right? So there were a couple of those restaurants in Anchorage, and they had good wine lists, but I didn't even know what that meant because we just weren't around it. And then I ended up in my 20s, I decided I would just kind of try everything I could get my hands on that wasn't excessively dangerous or illegal, but and in that process start realized I could enjoy and be curious about wine, and then but ended up becoming an academic. So I
Right.
was a philosophy professor, philosophy faculty, and so I did that for a while, and then realized that it was not a great time to be an academic in the United States, and that teaching at that level it was under resourced, so it was
Yeah.
really hard. But at the same time I had been kind of building that career, I had been getting to know wine more and more and more. So when I left academia, I kind of accidentally turned wine into a career. I didn't really realize I could, but I was like, I really want to understand this. And I sort of treated it like another graduate school research project, and it developed into what I'm doing now.
I'm curious, and I can't remember whether I asked you this when we spoke 5 years ago, but what was like your family's reaction when you left academia and then moved into the world of wine? Was it, oh great, or was it, what on earth are you doing, or something totally different?
So I waited a really long time before I shared my plans with anyone. Um, I kind of had made plans to leave academia a year before I actually did. So just the idea was like, if I give myself time, I can do it as gracefully as possible. So I didn't talk about that until I was like, the week I was going to give resignation. I called my parents. Like I wanted things to be in place. I didn't want to have to explain. I knew that this is what I needed to do. And so I got everything in place, and then I told my parents that before resigning, I felt like that was the courteous thing to do.
Right.
And I really to be honest, I expected them to be really upset and try and talk me out of it. And what happened, so this is the like pre-wine stage. My dad decided that the two of them should fly down and see me in person, and I was like, oh my God, what is this going to be? And
Going to be an
it turned out
intervention.
he wanted me to see on his face that he understood,
Oh, amazing.
which was, yeah, I mean, that was kind of an amazing moment with my dad, especially. And then when I started doing the wine thing, I don't think either of them really got what it meant. But in my mom's mind, I don't know, she was just really proud. Like somehow her perception of what I was doing was like everywhere I went, somebody wanted to support what I was doing and meet with me. And I was traveling because people wanted to see me. And
Uh-huh.
so in her mind, that meant I was doing something that was garnering respect.
But she's not wrong.
Well, thank you. But she also didn't know what any of it meant. So she, and this is way when blogs were still a thing, like you could build community around blogs, and so she would like very proudly tell whoever she met in wine that I was a blogger, not knowing for a wine person that was not a huge compliment, right? But I was like, it doesn't matter. My dad, he was always kind of reticent. I ended up realizing that what I needed to do, I spent a lot of time, anytime I'd tell him about a trip, because he'd want to know, well, what do you do in these visits? And I would make sure I spent way more time talking about spitting than drinking or tasting.
Yeah.
He didn't want me to go the bad way with alcohol. And so I just always made sure I like fit that in. Oh yeah, no. So God, I spit so much yesterday. I went to 5 wineries and I was spitting all day long.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, did you have a like an aha wine moment, like either a specific wine or a or an event or a visit or something that really turned you on to its kind of potential?
Yeah, I kind of had a series of three because again, I didn't grow up around it really.
Right.
I knew it existed and that it was somehow, I thought of it almost as part of a classical education.
Hmm.
Like for whatever reason, I developed this sense that to really get it, to really like have a good basis for understanding the progression of things, that we needed a classical education, but that's not how education worked anymore.
Right.
So I just sort of, again, I don't know how I came to this, but even as a kid, I was like figuring out how to build myself a classical education with also the regular stuff going on. And so somewhere in there, I understood, oh, well, eventually wine is part of a classical education. I had no idea that that would be thoroughgoing. I just thought, oh, I'll spend a couple months or whatever. But yeah, so then for my uh 21st birthday, a friend of mine gave me a really nice bottle of Chianti Classico. I don't know anything else besides that. And it was the first time I smelled a wine and tasted it. And I was like, oh, this is good. I didn't know. And then later that same year, my sister took my other sister and I out to dinner and ordered a Premier Cru Burgundy. And again, that's all I know. And it was like had no idea this was even possible, but it was one of those classic moments. I put my nose in the glass and instantly I was like, oh God, oh, this is what that thing is. This is why. But I still didn't realize I'd get obsessed with it. It was the final moment that kicked me into what I'm doing now. Was I was ha- I had a glass of 2008 Irie Vineyards Pinot Meunier from Willamette Valley, and people didn't. There was not like now wine people, I mean, have a sense of what Pinot Meunier is, and people even like seek out Pinot Meunier champagne and stuff like that. But that's like last 8 years ish or something. People, when I started in wine, people did not know what Pinot
Yeah.
Meunier was. They had to be like working with it to know. And Irie was one of the few in the world that made it as a red wine. And I didn't even know what it was when I had this vague sense when I had that bottle that what it was, but I tasted that wine. I was just like, oh my God, like what? I was just compelled and confounded and
Cool.
intrigued and like had a need to understand and just kept wanting to sip it to understand. And so I started looking up and who made it and why is it that and that was the moment where I realized, oh my God, there's all these additional layers. This is like there's a story, there are people, there's history. This shaped a possibility that didn't exist until this wine got started. All these layers of thing that you already know I'm so into with wine. That was the wine that made me realize that could be how it was approached.
So cool. Do you remember the first wine you wrote about?
It definitely, well, so initially I just had a blog that was just because, again, people don't even realize blogs were a thing, but there was a period where you just had blogs because it was like how you interacted with people publicly. It didn't even have to be
We
professional
remember
or,
this.
yeah. And so I had one of those and I would just occasionally do a quick post on something I liked that I'd done recently. And so it definitely would have been champagne. My sister Melanie and I we're both into champagne right away and before I ever worked at wine or anything. But we both lived in these weird areas where you couldn't get wine. I was in northern Arizona, which is moderately remote, and she was in Alaska, which is remote. And so we would basically spend the year collecting champagnes, not just any champagne, but like champagne somehow we heard was cool or good or we knew was iconic or something. And then like twice a year we would fly to the other one, and it was a disaster because we both have like a case or case and a half of wines, and now we had double that, except then we only had 6 days. So then we started planning it so we'd have at least 10 days, and we'd have to chart the 10 days so that it'd be like, okay, so let's see, if we go slowly we could do 3 bottles today because we'll start with breakfast, and we would like chart it out so we get through all the champagnes in the visit. um and yeah, so that was kind of how the like practice of
Cool.
diving in started. Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward to now. I mean, you are in demand. I mean, I just saw you do a keynote speech at an industry conference. I know you spoke the week before at a different conference. You're writing. You are editing. You're contributing. Like, what does your work life look like at the moment? Like, how do you? What are all the different? Not all the different things. But what's the balance of the different things that you are working on?
Yeah, so I do a lot of different things. This is also, first of all, I do not recommend anyone do what I do. Secondly, this like works for me. So that's really what it comes down to, right? Like what's going to work for any one person. So my work life is incredibly varied, but there's like value, like the things that make it coherent are my values basically. But and so like I just sent a quick outline proposal for an organization I'm advising on next steps for them to move forward towards their goals this morning. And then after this, I'm going to send a quick outline to a writer I'm working with because she's developing a book and she asked me to be her editor. So I'm like guiding her through the stages. So I'll like send like a calendar. These are the next steps to do. But then on Saturday, I fly to Paris and I'll give, so I think 3 seminars at Wine Paris.
Yes.
So in the middle of that, there's, okay, like a couple months ago, I worked with the people to pick all the wines. Initially, I worked with them to just develop the theme. So I'll like interview them. Why are you doing this? What do you imagine it could be? What effect, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll
Yeah.
use that to like construct a seminar concept and then choose wines and do all this stuff with them. So next week I'll be in Paris, and I'll be at Wine Paris, which is a big international wine event. And my kid lives there now, going to art school, so I'm gonna get to spend time with them, which is awesome. And then I'll come back, and I will be. I'm a board member for the Wine Writer Symposium, and we'll have the event. So I'll do 2 days of being part of it and speaking and interviewing, blah, 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 mentoring, and then I'll fly to Seoul and I will do 3 events, 2 seminars, and a VIP dinner in Seoul, one of which will be at the embassy there. And then I'll fly to Osaka and I'll do the same kind of thing there. But then I'll go spend a day in Kyoto to go to a really awesome Japanese gin distillery
Awesome.
because yum. Then I'll fly to Tokyo and I'll do a similar thing there, 2 seminars, VIP dinner at the embassy, and then
Are those things that are done in conjunction with the California Wine
yeah,
Institute?
so those are California wine events. So I work for a mix of just all kinds of people. So like I said, I'm advising a nonprofit organization. They're trying to kind of redevelop and get clearer on their mission. So I'm bringing them through a mission process and identifying like, what can make this work, like early strategy type things to rebuild. And so that's one thing I do. But then as I said, I've agreed to kind of mentor edit a woman who's
Cool.
writing her book, which that's a kind of thing that's really meaningful to me. And then I'll work with a region or a organization or some kind of group to create a seminar series or a training series or
Right.
something like that. And then I also review wine in different capacities, sometimes as a wine judge for competition, or for a magazine, and or just to say, oh, these would be appropriate for such and such event, right? And then also write articles. So yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it also sounds like a lot of things that it's easy to get excited about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the variation, that's why I say, and I don't recommend anyone do it this way, but for me, the variation works. And it's not always been all those things, right? Like when I
Right.
started, I was just like, as I would call it, researching and trying to understand wine. So it was like 6 days a week, 8 to 13 hours a day, just like doing like this kind of thing, except me interviewing you, sitting down with wine, trying to understand, and then that ended up evolving into magazines asking me to write for them because I had done the deep dive in Paso, for example, or whatever. And then that suddenly people were like, oh, wait, you used to be in the classroom, you could do a seminar. So then I started just moderating pre-created panels, but then suddenly I was creating seminars, and it's just kind of built over time into all these various types of activities.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about your book. This is the one of the copies that we are currently selling in our tasting room. So it was published last summer, but how long was the process? Like, when did you first think of doing this book, and what was the process like getting it to reality?
So I was really lucky in that I was aware of the publisher. So it's Classic Wine Library. They're an imprint under Academie du Vin. When I started working with Classic Wine Library, though, it was its
Okay.
own imprint. So I actually originally I contracted with the original publishing team. Um, and so I was already aware of what they were doing. This was a few years before the pandemic. And before that, I actually had been really reticent to even think of, like, people would be like, "Oh, you should write a book," and I'd be like, "Why? Why should I write a book?" Because the idea of doing it so I would have written a book didn't. I was like, "That's not a thing." And then I didn't feel the need to prove myself by having written a book either. I
Right.
think these are relevant reasons. It was like those were not relevant for me, and
Right.
so it was very clear to me that I wasn't going to write a book unless there was a reason that I needed to write a book
Yeah.
on that. And so then people started asking me about if I'd ever write a book on whatever. And I just was like, I don't know why. And then finally, I ended up having a conversation with some of the team at Classic Wine Library. And this was early enough for me. It was like 2018 or 19 that we had the conversation. And it was early enough that they were curious about if I would be a good person to write it, but they weren't sure. And so, and by then I was like, kept thinking about it because we'd had that conversation, and I was like, you know what? I could totally write that. and and I started looking at it, and there hadn't really been a comprehensive California book in a really, really long,
Yeah.
like decades. So I just kept driving. I was still doing the stuff I did, driving around meeting with producers like we're doing now, and but I had all this time in the car driving, or all this time on a plane, and I would just like, what would this book be? What would make it worth writing? Like, why would we need a book on California now? All these kinds of questions.
Right.
And so then I finally, I just basically put together an outline and a description of what I thought a book like that needed to be, and sent it to them. So it was like a proposal in brief, basically.
Yeah.
I sent that to them. They sent back a couple questions. We did a little bit of back and forth, and then came to an agreement, and then signed contracts. So that was how that part started.
Hmm.
But then, as some people know, my parents went through a whole bunch of health crises, and I'm now legal guardian of my mother and executor of my father, and that's all kind of just started in 19, and then really came to a head in 21, and has been ongoing since. So I ended up having to tell them, look, I can't meet this deadline. We postponed it. In the meantime, we went to Academie du Vin, and that actually, I think, was really valuable, that extra time. I mean, it was total hell to live through, as a side note, but it also meant I kept being able to, like, grow up in wine, so to speak, and reconsider what a book should be, and
Right.
why would I write a book. And that then I stuck to the basic framework I had submitted, but reconceived of what the parts of all that meant looked
Right.
like.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think that have become clear in the last 5 years that were not clear before that. Like, anybody who lived through the 2020 vintage in California, like, can be
Yeah,
no
yeah,
doubt that climate change is not just something that we have to worry about for the future. It's something which is threatening the present
yeah,
of California wine. So, and then with the rise of regenerative farming, like, the actual tools that we have to address some of those big picture challenges have become a lot clearer also.
yeah. The one thing too, people keep asking how long did it take me to write, and there's like, for those who aren't writers, there's like the literal tick, tick, tick time, which, if we're only talking about that, it would sound abhorrently short. But the truth is, it's like I keep telling people, oh, well, I'm 51. It took about 48 years, because to briefly go back to this classical education notion that I, for whatever reason, had, there's a way in which I approached wine like that too. I would meet with someone and I'd be like, oh, I had, like the first time you and I met, you showed me what grafting looks like. I met you really early in my wine work, and you took me out to the bench and like showed me how you punch graft there and like wrap and the whole thing. And then we looked at it in a vineyard and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And so then I was like, this is a new little trail I need to follow. So then I would seek out on understanding that. And then I'd be like, oh, this connects to farming internet. And I would go find people that would let me prune with them. And, so I kept just like building layers of
Right.
understanding. And so that's part of what I mean about like,
Right.
okay, I
Took
wrote this
48
book in a
years.
certain amount of time, but because I already built so many layers of info.
Um, I'm curious. Like you, obviously, this is an incredibly deeply researched book going back to very early stages in California wine before people really think California wine was even a thing. I'm curious if there was something in that research that really like surprised you that you were not expecting to find that you found, and you were like, "This is really important. People need to know this, and they probably don't."
It's a little hard to answer, but the big moment for me was, I mean, I was like, okay, I kept looking at other people's accounts of California wine history, and I would think, wait, but what about this whole 100 years? Or like, you jump, like, what about before Prohibition? Or, like
Right.
there were all these places I was like, but I want to know about that. So that was one thing. And then as part of that, it was like people would mention, the sacred expedition. They crossed what's now the border of San Diego, and then the missions. And then they would jump all the way to, you know, end of the 1800s or something. And I was really like, no, no, no. There's a way we got from here to there, but we also had to get to where planting vines after the sacred expedition was even, like basically
Right.
I just kept being like, wait a minute, wait a minute. So I kept looking up, trying to understand what was going on in this time period. And I had this moment where I realized, oh, of course, this is like the sacred expedition we treated as it's just the advent of missionaries coming into California. But actually, if you step back, what is this moment? It's international politics, global economic change, the creation of an entirely new colony,
Yep.
expansion of empire, social hierarchical change, like all in wine.
Yep.
And I decided to kind of just try to build out my understanding of that first
Yep.
event, which then led to the creation of the first chapter, which is on the
Yep.
first 100 years of California wine. And that was such a big effort, like not just research, but I kept asking myself, what does it mean to recover a history that's either missing or erased? But genuinely, like I don't want to make up a history. So what does it mean to recover one in a genuine way? So that was like, I was working really hard on that idea to create what turned into chapter one, but that ended up kind of percolating into my whole thought process on the history section. And so it was like, in a way, it's like, what did I discover that I was like, people don't know? It's like the whole history
Yeah.
section, which is just
Everything
how
before
integrated
like
wine is to everything.
1965, like I feel like people don't know. We kind of on a semi-related note, we had the opportunity to share a cool old bottle of
Yeah,
Clos
that
de
was
Val
amazing.
Merlot at the speakers' dinner after the symposium a couple weeks ago. And I'm curious, like, how much were you able to dive into some of these older wines? I mean, you have the stories of whatever the pre-modern California age, but were there any super interesting old wines you got to try in this process?
Well, I think just in my time in wine in general, I've been really lucky that way. Like I think I've been really lucky. Like there's this weird quirk that when I started in wine, California wasn't cool. And so so if I was if but I was like, but that's not true. California is cool. People just need to find out. And so I would be so invested that somebody would be like, you know what, I have this bottle of, and so I would get to taste old things like almost immediately when I started. And then it'd be like a big anniversary year. And so then I'd be invited to an event and we're having 25 wines from the 74 vintage, just weird coincidences like that. And then for me, the relationships, the connection time like we have here, like that's been ultimately the whole point. Like the wine is a means to do that. And I think my, it's turned out my caring about that means other people care about that with me, and so we want to share our best things with each other. So I've gotten to have a lot of old wine. I've been really lucky. It's for me though, knowing about the history and very intentionally seeking out to understand that, to then have a wine like you shared, it's like such a big deal because I feel like there's like layers of meaning there. One of the most significant events like that I briefly reference in my book, which was I had been spending all of this time on the history of Pinot Noir on the West Coast of the United States and was like really, really digging into Brad Webb, the first winemaker at Hansel, and how he's really underregarded, but he actually, all of these essential things we take for granted in wine, he developed them. And so I was spending all this time trying to understand that and reading, and I was always clear I would never, this is amazing and I'll never get to have one of his
Right.
wines. And then, but it didn't matter that I wouldn't taste it. I was like, this is incredible.
Right.
And just knowing this. And then I was having lunch with Paul Draper, like at the end of this, like intensive research period on this stuff. And he's like, well, what have you been working on? And I was like, well, I was just in Oregon. I got to taste a bunch of old vintages of Willamette Valley Pinot, but I've really been reading a lot about Brad Webb. And he's like, okay, so you drive to such and such where we're having lunch and I'll meet you there. I need to do something real quick. I was like, okay, sure, yeah. And so I like go to where we're gonna have lunch, and he shows up with two bottles of wine, and they're the 65 and 66 vintages of Hansel Pinot Noir made by Brad Webb.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then we're like, oh my God, the whole moment was amazing because he and I are talking and we're riffing back and forth, telling each other the story of this history about around the bottle that we're drinking. And it's like, I wasn't there. He actually knows it from having experienced it.
Right.
And we're mutually psyched to talk. And then he, after that, for a while, he's like super happy. And he asked me, well, what do you think of the wine? And I just burst out crying because it was like, again, like,
It's
is
like
it,
everything that wine can be and can mean. I mean, it's
yeah.
personal connection, but it's also all the other things that you mentioned. It's history, it's culture, um, it's adaptation. I don't know. So such a cool story. Thank you for sharing this.
Well, and it's like this moment where it's like, Jason, like you and I right now, we're participating in all those things you just named. That's incredible to me. I was thinking today about, when you started the series, because I was pretty early as a guest, but that you, at the time, you told me, well, part of what caused you to start it was that I had asked you to be part of the Behind the Wines series that Katie Canfield and I did for California Wines in 2020. And that was one of the first online ventures into
Yeah,
wine material like this. So none of us had done it before, but you were one of the first guests for that. And then it triggered all these things, one of which was you were like, this is cool. And you started exploring online stuff. And it's like, and now here we are. It's just this, yeah, just the interconnectedness of all that. It always blows my mind.
yep, for sure. Okay, one more question about the book. I guess, like, if there is a sort of a take-home lesson that you hope people who read it leave with, what would that be?
There's this is my cheesy, this is a great way of exposing who I am, but it's like there's so much to care about.
Right.
I think part of where I was coming from with this book, which I mentioned in the introduction, is just there is so much to care about. And I think a lot of times from the wine industry perspective, we are like, oh, well, we need to simplify it. Oh, well, we need to make it more straightforward, except now you're supposed to use the right language to talk about it and, you know, prove you're smart and all these things. And it was like, okay, we keep saying we want people to care about wine, but removing all the parts that are worth caring about aren't going to
Right.
make people do that. And so for me, the book was like, there's so much to care about with wine, and because it connects to all the things you're naming, and because there's so much that goes into making it. So how can I write that in a book that still is delivering what people think wine information is supposed to look like? You
I
know?
had a conversation along those same lines with Meg Maker, who I'm sure you know,
Yeah.
who I think is a very eloquent thinker about lots of wine questions. And we came to the conclusion that what wine needs is not to like minimize um, its complications. It's to make all of that complexity relatable and approachable, relatable and interesting. It's to celebrate
Yeah.
that complexity in a way that brings people into it, not to kind of smooth that complexity over as though
Yeah.
like too much for people and they shouldn't be able to handle it.
My whole thing with if I'm public speaking, leading a seminar, or writing is that it's like, this sounds trickier than I mean it, but it's like I want to bring in as much of the complexity as possible in super clear, accessible way.
Yeah,
Like, so my whole goal is to write and speak with a tone that's saying, this, all you need is interest.
yeah.
Like all you need is interest. If you're interested, anything you want, we can do that. I can share any information I have. I'll happily do that. And so then the only demand on the other side, the reader or the attendee or whatever, is to pay attention. Like, and then I want to give you what shows how cool it is. And so if you're not interested, then don't be. But if you're interested, then all you should need is interest, and the rest is there.
I could not love that anymore. Like that is so spot on. Um, So it has been half an hour. I cannot believe that it has been half an hour. It flies by. But I would love you to share how people learn more, how people learn more about the book, how people learn more about the other work that you're doing. If people want to see you speak, how they learn about that. What's the right way for people to connect with you?
Well, so the funny thing is, I vividly remember that 4 years ago when we did this, I promised you I would make my website clear about these things, and so now I need to actually follow through on that promise. But if you search my name, Elaine Chukan Brown, Chukan, then you'll find an inordinate amount of stuff. But then also here on Instagram, Hawk_Waka Waka, if you search for that or follow me there, then there's a certain amount of stuff. The problem is I'm really bad at self promotion. Like I'm like too interested in the other stuff. So I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I did that. But I'm now, but yeah, search my name. You'll certainly find links to the book, um, to some events, and again, Instagram has connections to some of the things I've read. And as I said, I need to actually build out a website where it's like what I've written, blink, and then and then events. And I just am going to be honest and say I haven't, but there's tons out there if you search my name. So
Amazing. Well, for anybody who has not gotten a chance to see you live and in person, I highly recommend it. It was a pleasure to see you speak and also to get a chance to spend some offline time with you in
yeah,
person.
thank
So
you again for the having time with dinner and the wine you shared. It's really special.
totally my pleasure. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Elaine, for coming back on to have another conversation. Go and get her book if you do not have it yet. Um, and I will see everyone in a couple of weeks. My next guest in 2 weeks is going to be John Albin, which will be really fun.
Awesome.
So
Total legend.
super cool. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks.
See you all soon.